Hi, Kit here with another video. Hope everyone is doing well. I took some time off from my previous interview where I interviewed David Rovics. Here with my little dog, Molly, right behind me. She's going to be joining us. Yeah, I had technical problems with my laptop. The keyboard doesn't work. I'm actually using my work computer right now, which I'm kind of not supposed to do, but I'm doing it anyway. I can see the visual, the clear is much clearer, so I'm upgrading my system in the near future. Okay, so hope everyone is doing well here. First, if you like my content, please subscribe. Please like and subscribe. Helps me build the channel. I'm not making money out of this, but I'm hoping to build up the channel. I have 119 subscribers right now, which is really good. I'm psyched. If I've had a few people unsubscribe, and that's totally okay. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. Just so you know what you're getting into before you go on. I'm a socialist. I'm on the politically far left. I don't like the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. I actually think they're equally bad. I don't agree like, hey, the Republican Party are fascist, which some of them are. But the Republican Party are fascist, but the Democratic Party can't protect you from fascism. Only we could do it. I don't agree with that narrative. I think they're different, but both parties are equally bad, equally repressive, equally totalitarian. And so I think I'm pushing back. I think the left has to push back against liberal narratives. Like there have been several dividing lines in the left in recent years. The Syrian civil war has been a really big dividing line. Who's the main bad guy in Syria? Is Assad? Is Assad a bloody tyrant who's gassing his own people? Or is the US the main bad guy? It's not black and white, but I think the U.S. is. Operation Timber Sycamore, the U.S. spending like billions of dollars in fostering jihadi groups, and the CIA has been heavily involved in Syria, basically ever since the French got out. It's a complicated situation, but the U.S. imperialism is always the worst. Another thing, the Capitol riot in January 6th of last year, what was going on was an insurrection, as NPR still calls it. A lot of people on the left are really terrified it could be a fascist takeover. I disagree with that narrative. Jimmy Dore, the Force the Vote movement, all these issues, there are dividing lines and fissures in the left. And, I can't be neutral. I have my own viewpoints. As you can tell from my previous videos. So I'm opposed to third campism. People think I'm a campist. I'm opposed to third campism. U.S. imperialism is the worst. I think we have to actually talk to people. A populist approach might be useful. Doesn't mean I like the right wing at all. Anyway, so if you like what you see, you can subscribe. If not, unsubscribe. It's okay with me. I'm building up the channel. I think there's an audience for my views. Okay, here goes. This is now, which brings me to the topic on Caleb Maupin. Caleb, in defense of Caleb Maupin, who is Caleb Maupin and why am I defending him? I mean, I have some disagreements with him, but overall, I think he's a good approach. So, who is Caleb Maupin? Well, I'm not an expert on his career. I first became aware of him, I believe, around 2008, 2009, probably around 2008. I was in Socialist Alternative at the time, and I was living in the Boston area. Caleb got some media exposure. I believe he either got a show on RT or Press TV. I'm not really sure, but there was some leftist media buzz around him. I don't fully remember at the time. And he was in the Workers' World Party, young guy from Ohio in the Workers' World Party. And at the time, I kind of thought of him as an annoying tanky. My politics have evolved since then, but I thought of him as an annoying tanky in some ways. So anyway, I actually briefly met him or sat next to him anyways, anti-war conference in my dog Molly wants to get up and hold on 1 second. Excuse me, come on. Yep. So I got, hi, still here. Yeah, I'm back. I have both my dogs, Max and Molly. They will be joining us for today's broadcast. Okay, so Caleb Maupin, yeah, I kind of met him at an anti-war conference in Ohio. when I was in Socialist Alternative. I was living in the Boston area. A bunch of us went out. It was either in Cleveland or Cincinnati. I actually don't remember. I went to meetings in Ohio a couple of times for some reason, and I was with Socialist Alternative. We went out. One time I went out with some people from the Boston Socialist Party, the SP. We chartered a bus, and one guy drove. And it was an interesting experience. I don't even remember what the meeting or the convention was about. I believe it was held at a community college in Cleveland or Cincinnati. And you had these events, there are main speakers, main events, and these side, the classrooms where people like have panel discussions or workshops or whatever. And so there's one like panel discussion I went to, was sparsely attended. I don't even remember what it was about, but there were a bunch of guys came in, young guys came in, and Caleb Maupin was one of them. He was kind of the leader. He had a much different persona than he has now. He had long, stringy red hair. Looked like a type of guy like to party a lot. And he came in with a bunch of guys who were kind of boisterous. And I recognized it was him. I nodded, and we nodded. I mean, he doesn't know me from Adam. But so that was my brief interaction with Caleb Maupin. Okay, so I forgot about him for a while. He was off my radar. I moved to Vermont. I was staying with my parents for a time in Vermont, and I went overseas. Bit of a long story. Then I came back. I was an at-large member of Socialist Alternative, not super active for a while. So there's some things going on. So I kind of forgot about Caleb. I totally forgot about him. Then a couple of years ago, there was a buzz about him on Facebook. I got on the Facebook left book. And people were talking about Caleb Maupin. He was, my section of left book, many, not everyone, but many people regard him as like a crypto-Nazi. He was a Strasserite, like referring to Gregor Strasser, who was like supposedly the left wing of the Nazi party, rival to Hitler. So Caleb was a Strasserite, a nazbol. He was basically a fascist. And I was kind of surprised by this. Like Caleb Maupin, I mean, tanky, but I don't think he's a Nazi. He's the other extreme. I was surprised by this, but okay, people who I generally respected were saying this. Okay, yeah, he's a secret Nazi. Okay, sure. I went along with it. Then more recently, about a year ago, in my a bunch of events, like especially the Capitol riot and some other things, my politics began markedly diverse. I noticed, I mean, it happened earlier, but my politics were much different from a lot of the Facebook left. Right now, Facebook is my main interaction with the radical left in the US, and my politics began definitely diverging in so many areas. Like I made a video, I kind of mentioned that at the Capitol riot, I thought Trump might have been right. It doesn't mean I like Trump. I don't like Trump. No, of course not. No, it doesn't mean I support Trump, but maybe the election was still in the ruling class. Biden beat Trump on electoral college votes. It goes down to 43,000 votes in 3 states. 2 of those states use proprietary software. I know challenges were thrown out by the courts. And Trump's whole thing was utterly comic opera. Yeah, of course. But I mean, the ruling class made a decision that Trump was too destabilizing. Why should that be such a controversial take? And it got in this big fights, and then other fights about other things, some of the COVID lockdowns, a whole bunch of stuff. And my politics were much, and I regard U.S. imperialism as the main enemy. So I'm a campist and whatever. So I kind of noticed my section of Facebook, my politics were moving pretty far away from most other people who I not interacted with, but people on the left book. So brings me to Caleb Maupin. I took a second look, like, why is he a Nazi? Why do people think he's a Strasserite, a red-brown Nazi? I was cool, and I checked into it, and right now I think that's absurd. No, Caleb Maupin is not a Nazi, a Strasserite, a crypto-Nazi, a fascist. No way. No way. I think it's totally absurd. I will discuss this in a minute. I think it's totally absurd. And as part of these shitlib narratives, so many people, the Facebook left has adopted like liberal narratives. People think they've left the Democratic Party, but they're still defending see things very much through their lenses, the liberal lenses. They're basically shitlibs. They're defending these narratives. So anyway, I took a second look at Caleb Maupin, and there's a lot I agree with. I don't totally agree with him. I do, but there's a lot I agree with. I'm going to discuss this. So, and I think he's doing some very good work, by the way. He's written several books. I've read 2.5 of his books over the past 2 weeks. The recent one is Breadtube Serves Imperialism, which I thought was really good, amazing contribution. I have some disagreements, but I think I get where he's coming from. He wrote another one, Satan at the Fountainhead, about the Zionist lobby. I'll talk about that. And another one is what's called, like, We Are City Builders. Yeah, the beginning of it is really good. I read half of that, and I have some critiques of these. Okay, so, and I will discuss the accusations against Caleb as a Nazi, where this comes from, and I think what's going on. Okay, so I think this is red-brown narrative. It's quite insidious. Earlier video, I talked about Alexander Reed Ross, who popularized this. My mate David Rovix is being accused of being red-brown. I think it's COINTELPRO shit, basically. Okay, so Caleb Maupin. So his book, Breadtube Serves Imperialism, made something of a hit. And when YouTubers I watch, made something of an online hit. He was interviewed by Jackson Hinkle, The Convo Couch, Frank Analysis, Franco on Frank Analysis, Max Blumenthal in the Gray Zone. I've interviewed him, and yeah, I think he talks about the synthetic left. I think he's basically right. He's 100% correct. So, what is breadtube? Okay, what's going on here? What is breadtube? Now Keel has discussed this on various YouTubers. He's had his own discussion of this. I'll just add to it, kind of repeating what he says largely. Okay, so breadtube is a section of Reddit. Reddit is this vast, sprawling internet forum where people can, there's many, many subtopics. According to one account, there are something like 10 million subforums. Only like about 100,000 of them are being used, which is vast. Forum. It was started in 2005 by 2 college students in the Boston area, and they got venture capital from this outfit called Y Combinator, which is a Silicon Valley venture capital firm, as far as I know. Guy Aaron Swartz was involved. He actually wrote the code for it initially. Aaron Swartz was a famous hacker, coder, computer high-tech entrepreneur. He hacked into, okay, so academic journals have been like a JSTOR, have been hot, like the public have the rights to these academic journals, and they're very expensive. They're milky. You can't have access to published academic work. You have to go through these journals. The actual writers, the academic people who write these articles, write for journals, don't get very little money from it. They don't get anything. While these very corrupt outfits, companies are really milking it dry. So what Aaron Swartz did, he hacked into this, and he exposed it. He leaked tons of academic papers, which is a boom if you're interested in, I don't know, the evolution of Serbo-Croatian in the 10th century, for example. I mean, scholarly articles were published, and you can't get it. You can't get it. He exposed it. He hacked, he divulged it. So now, like, JSTOR is a little more liberal. It's easier to read their stuff in reaction to this. So anyway, the powers that be really gave it to him. He had very severe legal problems, and basically, sadly, drove him to suicide. So a very sad story. He was a hacker, not quite like Julian Assange, but kind of the same mentality. The 2 other guys, anyway, he wrote the code for Reddit. So the other 2 guys, as far as I know, seem to be conventional, like basically Silicon Valley types. I don't know a lot about them. Anyway, Reddit took off. BreadTube is a section on Reddit, like several forums or subforums on Reddit, of leftist YouTubers, or leftist or leftish or liberal or sometimes libertarian YouTubers. It's a community, kind of. It seems to be fairly large. The name came from the book. Came from Conquest of Bread by Peter Kropotkin. Kropotkin was an interesting cat, just briefly, Russian anarchist, late 19th century, died 1921, I believe, Russian anarchist. He was a very high-ranking aristocrat, hereditary aristocrat, could have had a career in the royal court of the Romanovs, said he was involved in anarchist politics. He was in prison for a long time. He lived in the UK, in Brighton, in England for a long time. He lived in the US. He was a scientist. He was a geographer, and he did some scientific research into geography. I don't know the details. He spent time in different parts of the world. Anyway, his theory is an anarchist. He believed in sort of system of decentralized communities, pacifist communities based on mutual aid. He was not a Marxist. I don't know much or anything about his economic takes. I think his economic analysis of capitalism differed from Marxism. His politics definitely did. He did not believe in a centralized state. He did not believe in a centralized party. It's really bad. Anyway, he was not a pacifist exactly. Hey, interesting. His politics were wrong, but he had an interesting guy. In one of his famous books is called The Conquest of Bread, and it's often called the Bread book. I haven't read it, but breadtube takes their name from this. The breadtube. Another book Kropotkin wrote was called The Mutual Aid. I haven't read it, but I read about it. Had an influence on ecologists in like the 70s and 80s. Previous view of nature of ecology was like Thomas Hobbes said, nature is just red in tooth and claw. It's based on competition for food, for resources. Animals and plants are constantly in competition. And Kropotkin said, yeah, it's part of it, but it's more to it than that. There's also cooperation in nature as well. And it kind of changed our view of environmentalism and ecology. There's been some influence on the environmentalist movement to some extent. Anyway, I don't know a lot about Kropotkin. I know he supported Russia's entry into World War I, which was a huge black mark on him, became kind of unpopular on the left, far left. Anyway, he came back to Russia and he lived through the Russian Revolution. As far as I know, he opposed it. Actually, he opposed the Bolshevik Party. Lenin had a meeting with him, and Lenin actually was not an anarchist, but he kind of had a soft spot for anarchists. His brother was an anarchist, was hung, part of a plot to assassinate the Tsar. So he had kind of a soft spot for anarchists, even though he was not an anarchist himself. He had a meeting with Kropotkin sometime in 1920 after the Russian Revolution. He was kind of respectful. They had disagreements, but Lenin thought highly of Kropotkin's work on the history of the French Revolution, and he kind of arranged to have it distributed to every library in the Soviet Union, which was really interesting. And after Kropotkin died, there was Emma Goldman. People made their big speeches. That was kind of one of the last anarchist movements in the Soviet Union. Okay. So breadtube takes your name from Kropotkin, from the Conquest of Bread, the Bread book. It's breadtube itself pretty fairly large. I don't know, they're YouTubers collection. It's a collective of YouTubers. I don't know how many there are, probably several hundred, maybe several thousand. I mean, it's easy to make a YouTube video. I mean, some might have like 5 subscribers and make a YouTube video, but there are a bunch of YouTubers who are, prominent, well-known, have a lot of influence. So Caleb analyzes them, what's going on here. So breadtube kind of started, it took off, and roots might go back to 2014, 2015, but it started off around 2016 after Trump got in. And a large part of it was the reason for it was stated to de-radicalize the right wing. The Trump supporters, like young people who were being radicalized in the right-wing politics, to bring them back to de-radicalize Trump supporters and the growing the alt-right, which was all over the place back then. De-radicalize the alt-right. Caleb says that's a good goal. It's a very laudable goal, very good thing. He says the breadtube crowd was kind of hampered in this effort by their liberal politics. Basically, they're not Marxists. They don't have a Marxist critique, so they're kind of hampered by their liberalism. But it's a noble goal. They do some good things. Now, an early mentor, first of all, some breadtubers, prominent breadtubers, a lot of them, prominent breadtubers. There's a ContraPoints with Natalie Wynn. She's a trans woman. Got partway through grad school in philosophy, dropped out, didn't want to go into Korean academia. She dropped out. She started a YouTube channel and talks about philosophy and politics and related things. And she's been phenomenally successful. I'm not super familiar with her. I've seen bits and bits of her stuff. Very high production values, very well done. She's not a leftist. She kind of understands leftist ideologies, uses some leftist tropes, kind of goofs on it, and she's some familiarity with it, but she can't really be considered a leftist. I don't think she could be considered on the left. But, she's sometimes considered part of this breadtube crowd. I think over 1 million subscribers, very articles about it in the New York Times and elsewhere. Very, very successful YouTuber. There's another one, a bunch of others, Vaush, who's a really nasty character. Vaush, his real name is Ian Kaczynski. He comes from a wealthy Beverly Hills family. His dad's a Hollywood producer. He was apparently a gamer, professional gamer, played video games for a living, and apparently he was on the show Destiny, who's kind of a libertarian, another YouTuber who's a libertarian, and he got the idea of starting off on his own YouTube channel, very successful. I think he has close to a million subscribers as well. I'm not sure. He's a bit of a nasty piece of work. He poses as an anarcho communist, like ultra left. He's an anarcho communist. He does not oppose U.S. imperialism. He supports U.S. intervention in Syria and elsewhere. He doesn't understand Marxism at all. He claims to be, he basically stands for the Democratic Party. He even said, if you Marx, Lenin, or Mao, they all would have voted for Biden. Like, no way. I mean, he was pushing very hard for Biden. He's on one side, really, really pushing. He supports ultimately the Democratic Party and their narratives. He has an unhealthy preoccupation with pedophilia. He apparently talks about it a lot. At one point, he opposed the age of consent laws. Apparently, there are serious allegations he's been involved in pedophilia himself. I won't go into the details, but he appears to be, and he's also a nasty. You listen to him. Times I've watched him, he's a nasty character. He rage quits all the time. He gets in debates with people. Jackson Hinkle, Frank Analysis, Freud, Nico House. He rage quits all of them. He's kind of almost, I don't know if he's taken seriously or not. He's a buffoon, almost comic buffoon. He does seem to have a pretty big following though. So there are a couple other people. Thought Slime, anarchist, Matt. It uses Matt. I don't know his last name, but he's Matt or Thought Slime. He has this really good inspirational video for new leftist YouTubers, which I got something out of. But beyond that, his politics are pretty bad. He's generally pro-imperialist, and his politics are really, really bad. So Caleb kind of analyzes these people, and his thesis is we can't directly say this exactly, you can't directly prove it, but it's highly likely they're constructed opposition. They're essentially CIA left. Now Caleb mentions that the CIA has been heavily involved throughout the decades in social democratic politics and moving the left in certain directions. Like there was the group called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, 50s and 60s. I guess they're still around. CIA was heavily involved in it. They were kind of a leftist group. They were pushing back against Stalinism or her repression in Eastern Europe. Gloria Steinem was a CIA asset. She openly admits that she was. She doesn't hide it. Even to say she doesn't say, well, it was something I did when I was really young and I regret it. No, she even to this day, decades later, she brags about it. So the Congress for Cultural Freedom, those things were, and the CIA was involved in a zillion small leftist journals. Partisan Review, which originally was Trotskyist, had Dwight McDonald, very famous for journal. CIA was involved in later on to move it, and a bunch of other literary journals move them like an anti-communist. They were kind of on the left, but moved like the left in more of an anti-communist direction. It is known the CIA was involved in several social democratic politicians in Scandinavia, and it's generally, Caleb didn't say this, but generally believed their CIA was and is heavily involved in the Socialist International to move them in there. So, and they CIA sponsored abstract expressionist artists. I love the earlier European abstract expression, Paul Klee. I'm a huge Paul Klee fan, but the American Decoute version later there after World War II, 50s and 60s, like Rothko, de Kooning. I mean, just Jackson Pollock, most of it was crap. Okay, it was CIA art. CIA was sponsoring it to show the world what American culture can do. It says Jackson Pollock may be okay, but anyway, okay. So anyway, so we know they've done this. What Caleb kind of his thesis is that they're doing this with these YouTubers and with the left in general. They call it the synthetic left. And there's this guy we do a a guy named Steve Hassan, who is a cult deprogramming expert. He was in the Moonies when he was young, and then 1970s. He apparently was deprogrammed broke his family's heart. They came from like conservative Jewish family in the New York area. It broke their heart. They apparently got a deprogrammer, kidnap him and deprogram him. Apparently it worked. And so this guy named Ted Patrick, who ran this deprogramming thing. Stevenson was in the Moonies, and he broke out of it. And they family deprogrammer. So then Stevenson had his career as like a professional cult deprogrammer, runs this group or connected with this group called the Cult Awareness Network, which has been accused of kidnapping, felonies, things like that. Not a great record. There's a debate, what do you do with a loved one or someone you care about who is in a cult, like Scientology, the Moonies, things like that. Moonies, by the way, was started by the Korean CIA, probably helped along by the American CIA. Anyways, what do you do? I don't know myself. I'm not sure how ethical or even effective these kidnapping, deprogramming operations were, but I don't know. Anyway, Steve Hassan was part of this. He gets a big play on liberal Democratic Party media. He's on CNN and elsewhere. He wrote a book, I believe, in 2019, saying that Trump supporters were a cult, and QAnon mix it with QAnon, the alt-right is a cult. And I haven't read the book. I don't know his solution to it, but it's a little scary. I don't like Trump either. And yeah, there are cult-like elements of all politicians. AOC is a cult. This is all politicians in the U.S. They drum up these creepy personality cults. And yeah, Trump, there certainly is. But as far as with the right-wing as a whole, the network is a cult, I don't know. I mean, little dangerous when you're accusing even your political enemies of being a cult, which requires intervention. So I don't know. There's a whole debate about that, but a little scary. Anyway, so Steve Hassan guy was or is an advisor to the prominent bread tubers, Natalie Wynn, another guy, Hassan Piker. He's known to be an advisor. Now, as I said, the original idea of breadtube was to like bring some of these alien young people who were gravitating towards the alt-right, bring them out of that. And I don't know, no idea how successful they were. They might have been somewhat more, but. And Caleb says they're hindered by their own liberal politics, but they're also used against the left. They're a false constructed left. They bring people out of the left, remove them towards the people radicalizing, move them back in to the dead end of the Democratic Party. And Caleb analyzed their politics. They're not anti-imperialist. Some of them claim to be Marxist or anarchists, but they're all very weak on theory. Vaush doesn't know anything. He said stuff about Marx, which is completely untrue. Marx was anti-statist, was a libertarian, and he takes Marx's 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, very famous analysis of like what happened in the Revolution of 1848, flopped and died. Comic opera Louis Napoleon, cousin or nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, took over as a comic opera dictator, and kind of Marx brilliantly analyzes what happened. So anyway, Vaush. It's evidence that Vaush doesn't really know Marx. He's never read Marx, but someone is feeding him this information, and he takes it like way out of context, and he's a joker. So, Caleb makes the point in his book that anti-imperialism, strong anti-imperialism, is integral to a Marxist analysis. You can't be a Marxist or any sort of leftist and not be an anti-imperialist. Marx's concept of capital accumulation and production, overproduction. You have to be an anti-imperialist if you're a Marxist. And he makes a very good case. And also Vaush and other bread tubers The idea of socialism is kind of like Kropotkin, kind of decentralized networks. Bausch particularly is a market, decentralized market socialism, which is a joke. And he says, like, they fetishize the Mondragon project. It's been going on for decades in the Basque country of Spain. It's a network of co-ops. Maybe some really good stuff to it. What's not socialism? I mean, Mondragon itself was started under Franco by the Catholic Church. So I don't think it was seen as a major threat to the system. It's maybe some good stuff to it, but that kind of thing, it's like co-ops are not so. Rosa Luxemburg and a bunch of Marxists, István Mészáros, critiqued co-ops as a route to socialism. Workers are still in a market economy competing against each other. It's a competitive reifying capital relations. It's not socialism. I mean, can help. It certainly can help. I'm not opposed to co-ops, but it can help. But it's not so worker-owned businesses are just competing against other worker-owned businesses. Like Caleb brings up the case of the military. What if military production were all worker-owned enterprises? I mean, it would still be imperialist capitalism. So these people, the BreadTube crowd, does not have a deeper analysis. By the way, I just wanted to mention that I was briefly on BreadTube. I post some stuff there occasionally in some of the forums. The people I've interacted with were very friendly. I've got some good advice. I'm very friendly. I posted some of my early videos there. I didn't get much of a response. Generally, the type of videos on BreadTube, the BreadTube crowd, they're largely on the cultural left. Like you might get a lot of stuff on, say, LGBT representation in the Marvel Comics universe, which is not something I care about very much. I'm not saying they're all that way. There's some content is quite good. I looked at it recently. Some stuff was quite good. There's a general, I'm talking about the heavy hitters on BreadTube. They're the people with huge number of subscribers who left the pack. They do seem to get some aid. The algorithm is helping them. They get some help from the algorithm. While people like Jimmy Dore, the algorithm is hindering them. And there's kind of evidence they get some deep state support. So anyway, Caleb analyzes their Marxism. If their claim to be Marxist is completely weak, they don't have a socialist analysis. Their view of socialism is wrong. They're often pro-imperialist. Also, Caleb critiques their might be their some fetishism of indigenous cultures, and also their no growth, their opposition to a growth, industrial growth economy. I largely agree with Caleb in critiquing them. I do think the BreadTube and much of the left are constructed opposition. CA does this big time. I mean, they do. I think he's doing a valuable service. I might have some quibbles with Caleb's Marxism. Here's where I might disagree. Okay. So I get it. Marx hated Malthus. Marxists hate Malthusianism. There was a Paul Ehrlich book back in 1965, The Population Bomb, and the Club of Rome report, group of, I don't know, experts and academics in the 60s and 70s, world, the planet is overpopulating. We're going to type of Malthusianism combined with eugenics. Most of the people who are overpopulating happen to be black and brown people, and we're going to have to, it's outstripping the resources of the planet. There's socialist pushback against this big time, like, Thomas Malthus himself, back I think it was 1820s, 1830s, he thought Britain would be massively overpopulated, and Britain was able to, other industrializing countries, escape the Malthusian trap. It's a dialectical relationship with technology. Okay. However, there's a movie, The Planet of the Humans, which I saw came out in 2019. Great film. It was censored from YouTube, then they brought it back up. It lambasted the mainstream environmentalist movement, and it also talked. Different people got different things out of this movie. What I got out of this, I've been dying to ask Caleb about this movie. I kind of know what he'd say, but okay, the movie basically talked about renewables. We're screwed. We're screwed. I mean, we have to get off a fossil fuel economy. Climate change is very much real, but we can't. I mean, that I understand the level of technology of renewables will not fill the void. We need, fossil fuel economy. How can we support an industrial economy right now without fossil fuels? And the movie Planet of the Humans had this one clip, showed a festival, environmental festival. It had these big solar panels, solar collectors outside it. And however, somebody asked, well, is this powering the convention? This festival with bands playing and stuff, is this powering? No, I mean, the huge solar panels were barely able to power a toaster. They were there for show. Now, there's pushback. That was from 10 years ago, and solar technology is more advanced, more energy, more efficient than it was back then. Sure, but overall, as far as I understand, renewables are not able to fill the void. And we have to get off fossil fuels, or climate change is very real. So we're screwed either way. The movie tended to took like a Malthusian view, which Marxists would reject. So anyway, Caleb was a little breezy. He does say in his book, we're going to have to change our relationship to fossil fuels, and he talks about nuclear. I would agree, maybe thorium reactors. I would agree, but Caleb was part of the left, a little breezy and moving away from this. Now, there is a body of thought in Marxism, eco-socialism. Now, the term has been massively overdone, and it's used in widely different reasons. The DSA is an eco-socialist caucus. It doesn't really mean anything, but the original idea came in, thought, in the Monthly Review. John Bellamy Foster, back 10 years ago or so, body of thought. He's written several books and articles. The idea of Marx as an ecological thinker. Talk about Marx's theory of metabolic rift and so on. I'm not an expert in this stuff, but more of an ecological version of Marxism. Like Caleb is very much of strikes me as a productivist, which I get where he's coming from. Yeah, he's like Trotsky. I sometime in the 30s had this quote, and I don't know the extremely exact quote, but it was something like, how communists would challenge capitalism. We'd say, communists more efficient, more build up industry, play the advantages of a planned economy. So it's Trotsky's quote was something like, we will meet them with higher production quotas, higher steel production. We'll meet them in tons of tungsten, tons of productivity, and going on. And I read that years ago, like, what? Like, that wasn't the way, I'm a Trotskyist, but I was shocked by seeing that. That wasn't the way I thought. I came out of a different milieu, a different mindset, more of an environmentalist, harmony with nature mindset. And I was surprised by this. Put into context, that was where people were at in the 1930s, and it was necessary to develop the productive forces. Now we're in a kind of different, I get where Trotsky was coming from, but Caleb is kind of, sure, he doesn't have much use for Trotsky, but he's coming from that 1930s type mindset, build up productive forces of society. I get where he's coming from, but I tell people like William Morris. William Morris was a Marxist. He was a British artist connected with this group, the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood art movement, and he was an ecological man. He had an his book. I forget his name. His book was like an ecotopia type society, harmony with nature, not touchy feely, not new age, but it was much different than the steel workers, muscular steel workers building the productive forces of social, kind of a different mind view, somewhat different worldview, and still a Marxist. So interesting. So anyway, I would disagree with Caleb a bit on that. Some other things. Okay, Caleb is kind of anti-hippie. I went through, before I became a Marxist, I went through a hippie stage. By hippie stage, I meant not a hippie exactly, but I read a lot of countercultural philosophy, or Theodore Roszak, who wrote the book Making of a Counterculture. One read, was a guy, Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Pirsig, Robert Pirsig. He wrote part 2, Lila, bunch of other, whole bunch of books. I moved out of that viewpoint, but before I was a Marxist, I was very much into that type of worldview, which is kind of hard to explain. Was big on indigenous cultures, what alienation of Western culture, and harmony with nature. Now, I still think a lot of English, a bunch of E.F. Schumacher, economics, small is beautiful, or economics as if people mattered. These people were not Marxist, and I think they badly need a class analysis. But I'm not going to dismiss them either. I don't dismiss hippies. I don't. Much of the Facebook club really hates hippies. I don't totally dismiss this. I think they do bring up some valid points about alienation, and I think very important points. Caleb would, of course, hate this stuff. There's a book, kind of Norman Brown, Life Against Death by Norman Brown. It's a classic. Kind of hard to explain what it's about. It's billed as a psychoanalytic interpretation of history. It's sort of, anyway, I have a friend of mine really good, who I lost touch with, but he introduced me to Trotskyist politics. He would read Marx's Capital once a year, reread it, and he would read this Norman Brown, Life Against Death by Norman Brown, like as a companion piece to it, and he said it would give him insight into Marx's Capital. I can understand where he was coming from. It gives him some insight, overcoming alienation. Caleb would not have any of this. Like Caleb mentioned Freud, so Sigmund Freud, and he mentions Freud as one of his, CIA not CIA sponsors, but he dismisses Freud. He mentions Freud in the same sense as Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was this really weird English occultist. I know some leftists who are into Aleister Crowley. He's like Satanist, and I won't get into that too much, but I think it's insane, absurd comparing Freud with Aleister Crowley. Freud, whether you like him or not, he was one of the biggest figures of the 20th century. Huge influence. He still has influence. And well, a lot of Freud's not terribly popular right now. He was wrong-headed in some areas. There's some like neo-Freudians or post-Freudians who I quite like, who took out some, mostly women, who took out some of the sexist elements of Freud. I think of Melanie Klein, Alice Miller, The Drama of the Gifted Child, and Thou Shalt Not Be Aware, classic books. Anna Freud, Freud's daughter, I believe. I like Melanie Klein, and I like Alice Miller quite a lot. They're kind of neo-Freudians, and I think they have a lot to say. I'm not, Trotsky actually liked Freud. I wouldn't dismiss Freud, but so many, Wilhelm Reich is another guy. Wilhelm Reich is a psychologist. He was a follower of Freud, and then he left. He was in the KPD, the German Communist Party. He was expelled. Then he was in the Danish Communist Party. He was expelled. He went to the United States. He got a little weird. He got into aliens and an orgone collector. Yeah, he got a little weird, true. But earlier period, he wrote some really important stuff about the psychology of mass psychology of fascism. Listen here, little man, and a variety of other stuff. And I think, so anyway, Kib just completely dismisses him, that type of thinking. Any like psychological explanations of fascism just dismisses it. Caleb is a strict 1930s style materialist, and that's okay as far as it goes. Yeah, it's okay. Like, again, every generation unfortunately, has to rediscover the stuff for themselves. There's a movie, a Yugoslav director I forget his name, called Mystery of the Organ. It's called W, The Mystery of the Organism. It's kind of, it compares kind of like Yugoslavian communism with Soviet communism. It's kind of Reich, very much influenced by Wilhelm Reich influenced type of Marxism. That's kind of where I'm coming from in some ways. So Caleb I generally like him, and I think he's doing good work. He has like what they used to call official Marxism, like Islam Mazaros or Paul Maddock or a bunch of those guys, called official Marxism. The Soviet, the Cold War era, their Marxism. You read like the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. Was put up by the Soviet Union like every 10 years. That you can still find like college libraries sometimes have it. And I used to like thumb through it. Fascinating to read. It's interesting to read. Their Marxism is kind of one-dimensional. I mean, you can pick this up. They have really interesting stuff, fascinating to read, but you can see their viewpoint, their official Marxism, which to me is kind of reductionist. I mean, it's not bad as far as it goes. I mean, right now we need any Marxist analysis at all. It's not bad as far as it goes. So Caleb, even he talks about like some became politicized on reading commentary and literature from that period. Caleb has, he slams, rightfully slams the breadtube's view of fascism. There's knee-jerk, one-dimensional view. Oh my God, the insurrection, Trump's taking over. He slams this, and he talks about Marxist views of fascism. He briefly mentions Trotsky's view. Then he mentions Dimitrov, the Comintern's view of fascism. Okay, he's in this guy, Palm Duff, British theoretician, British Communist Party in the 30s. I'm not too familiar. And he talks about, talks about interpretations of what fascism is all about, Marxist views of fascism. But he dismisses Trotsky, had some amazing work on fascism and what he wrote, put together in his pamphlet after the Second World War. What is fascism? How do we fight it? And Caleb doesn't, engage with Trotsky's view of the Spanish Civil War, and Trotsky's view of what could have been done to stop Hitler. Trotsky was like begging the KPD and the SBT to like work together. Nope, they wouldn't. And the insane Comintern view of everyone's a social fascist. And Caleb doesn't mention this. He's a blind spot on this. So there would be, it mentions this book, The Aquarian Conspiracy by Marilyn Ferguson. Oh boy. Okay, so I read the book. I'm probably very few Marxists who read the book. The reason why I read the book years ago, when I was in college, I rented a room from this professor, film studies professor, Keene State College. Really nice guy. I just rented a room there. I didn't have any connection with him. I just rented a room, and a couple other students did as well, on and off. And he let me hang out in his library and read his books. He had a lot of books, like me, lots of books, and I used to flip through. He had the Aquarian Conspiracy. And some reason I kind of liked it. I bought a copy later myself. I don't know why I did. It's definitely not it's not a terrible book, but it's far from my favorite book. What the Aquarian, I think it came out in the early 1980s, maybe 1980. It made kind of an impact. It was really lambasted by both the right and people on the left, but mainly because of the title, Conspiracy. What the Aquarian Conspiracy basically is, it talks about stuff, movements coming out of the 60s and 70s, like humanistic psychology or transpersonal psychology. People like Ken Wilber, Buddhist philosopher. They talked about alternative healthcare, which I wouldn't dismiss. A whole bunch of alternative therapies. It wasn't crystal woo. It took more of an academic viewpoint. It wasn't really crystal woo stuff, but anyway. It was the thesis of the book that is going to transform society. People took it like the march through the institutions. These people graduated in the 60s and 70s movements who want to transform society in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it was wrong. And my issue with the book was smug. I mean, it was into some profound stuff, I think, but it was smug. Had an upper middle class professional viewpoint. I graduated from college. I was working at a restaurant as a dishwasher, which I fucking hated. I was really miserable at the time. And I read through this book, and it did some interesting stuff, but it was kind of smug. It was upper middle class professional people, and it was kind of, so it's not a horrible book, but it's not my favorite book either. Anyway, Caleb talks about this book in some of his discussions with his interviews too. He thinks it's CIA was behind much of the counterculture and the New Age movement, which he might be true. Esalen, famous New Age center in California, may have had security state ties. I'm sure they did. It's possible the popularity of LSD was sponsored by the CIA, the famous Trips festivals, Ken Kesey, the Trips festivals. They may have, CIA may have, I don't know. I'm more pro hippie than Caleb is. I mean, I do not think hallucinogenic drugs can transform society, but I think they can. How about Gabor Mate? Used as a therapist, famous therapist, works as trauma and addiction. He's used ayahuasca in healing people. I think some of these can have some validity. I'm not, Caleb is kind of a straight edge guy, like 1930s official Marxism. Anyway, I don't hate the guy. That's good as far as it goes. I mean, he does make a very good contribution. So it'd be some of my critiques. Okay, further on, the accusations about Caleb being a Nazi or a fascist, where this comes from, I was surprised when I saw it on Facebook a couple of years ago. I originally, but wait a second. And I investigated that. It comes from a couple of things. He, a couple of years ago, I don't remember when, he was at a conference with this guy, Alexander Dugin. Alexander Dugin is a conservative Russian nationalist philosopher. I'm not an expert on the guy. He was in this, Wikipedia says he's a fascist. I don't know if he is. I kind of wouldn't regard him as a fascist, but I don't know a lot about the guy. Alexander Dugin was kind of a semi-dissident in the late Soviet period. I think he wrecked his career, academic career. He was semi-dissident. He was in this occult study group, but he also regarded himself as a Marxist. His Marxism, he said he was a static Marxism without Ludwig Feuerbach, philosopher's big influence on Marx. static. I don't know what that would be like. I really don't know. But anyway, after the Soviet Union collapsed, he was Dugin was I believe he was a co-founder of the Russian Communist Party, not the party of Lenin, but the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which is not great, but I believe he was a co-founder of it, kind of moved in a nationalist direction. He was influenced on Putin. Then he left that, and he was a co-founder of this group called the National Bolshevik Party, where from nazbol comes from. The term came from an earlier movement coming out of the German Communist Party in the 1920s, which was supposed to combine German nationalism with communism. Most of these people, there were several different currents. Most of these people regard themselves as communists, but Germany had lost World War I. It was kind of partly occupied by the French, and really treated horribly. They were trying to make some connection with German nationalism. It was not terribly popular, but they regard themselves as communists. And I don't know a lot about the National Bolshevik Party later, Dugin's group later on. He formed it with guy Edward Limonov, Russian writer, novelist, who's kind of the Russian version of Charles Bukowski. Limonov left and falling out. Limonov had a separate group which moved more to the left. They were anti-globalists, things like that. I don't know an awful lot about the National Bolsheviks. Often people say they're fascist. I don't really know. Anyway, so Dugin left that and he became like a Eurasianist type of Eurasianist philosophy. And his main seminal book is called The Fourth Theory. I have it. I read like the first quarter of it. Basically, what he says, the first theory was liberalism. Dugin says the first theory was liberalism, came out of the French Revolution, liberalism. Second theory was socialism, Marxism, social democracy, which revolted against liberalism. There was a second theory. Third theory is fascism. Said he condemns fascism. He says it didn't work. It was smashed in its infancy in World War I. Thankfully, Dugin does not appear to be pro-fascist. He condemns fascism. And then the fourth theory is coming into being. Said we need a fourth theory. These previous three theories didn't work. And I don't know. He says alliance or sympathetic to a conservative French philosopher, Alain Benoit. I don't know. I haven't read these guys. So that's about as far as I got into Dugin's book. Caleb has a video where he discusses Dugin. He says, I'm not a Duginite. I'm a Marxist. I don't align with Alexander Dugin. He says, what Dugin, I don't align with this. What he says is there's grains of truth to what he was saying. Dugin says he's anti-fascist. He doesn't appear to be pro-fascist. He says the Atlanticist cultures, like Atlantic Seaboard, US, Western Europe, whatever, are individualistic, capitalist, pro-capital, individualistic cultures, while Russia, China, Venezuela, indigenous cultures around the world are naturally communal and collectivist, like collectivist philosophies like Marxism have been popular in that part of the world. Now, he would say that's why ultimately I don't know how he moves forward. He said, different rival civilizations, more of a communalism. And anyway, so I don't know where Dugin goes with this or what his ultimate goal is, but he wants to build some kind of fourth theory movement. Okay, so Caleb says, Dugin is not a fascist. The CIA, the Wikipedia page says his CIA has determined he's a fascist. And, part of the shitlib hysteria over Russia, like Dugin is this this Nazi mastermind behind Putin, behind sinister Putin trying to recreate the Soviet Union, or some part of the shitlib narrative demonizing Dugin. I don't know enough about Dugin to really say. Okay, so Caleb says, there are grains of truth. I disagree with Dugin. There's some grains of truth to what he says. Anyway, he's a Eurasianist. Okay. And it is possible maybe Caleb sees room for some alliance between the left in the US and maybe some broad Eurasianist movement. I don't know. Anyway, Caleb was at a conference, a YouTube video at a conference, Eurasianist conference. He was sitting next to Alexander Dugin. And he said something like this. It was 2016, shortly after Trump got in. He said something, Trump represents a populist upsurge against neoliberalism and capitalism. He said, I'm on the left. I don't support Trump, but I understand the impulse behind it. And when he said the bankers will never support Trump. And Facebook left takes this as an anti-Semitic dog whistle. The bankers is a code word for the Jews. Now, reading Caleb's other stuff, I really don't think he meant it that way. I think he meant the bankers. He meant finance capital. I don't think he meant it as a buzzword for the Jews. Could be wrong. I don't think he meant it that way. Anyway, people really slammed him for saying this, for even being, he has a show on RT, by the way. People slam him for that. I see nothing wrong with being on a leftist, American or Western leftist, being on RT or Press TV. I see nothing wrong with that, especially geopolitics. The left is pretty much frozen out of corporate media in the US and the UK, totally frozen out. Especially, you might have some guy, somebody organizing labor action might get on CNN, but you're not going to have any critiques of imperialism. I think not only good thing, it's important. RT and Press TV do have the open space for people like Richard Medhurst, Caleb Maupin, Jimmy Dore's been on RT, whole variety of people to criticize U.S. imperialism. Yeah, they're doing it for their own reasons. Yeah, okay. Russia isn't socialist, but there are a whole bunch of other things. So anyway, I said Caleb's connection with Alexander Dugin. People say he's a Duginite. He's not. He actually said he analyzed Dugin's thoughts, and no, I really disagree with this stuff. He's wrong. Totally disagree with this stuff. But this is where he's coming from. Okay. The second thing people have against another evidence against Caleb Maupin, he wrote this book called Satan at the Fountainhead, and I just finished reading it last night. What he does is he talks about the Zionist lobby. The book is not very well written. It's terribly written. He brings up some really important points, which everyone should know about. It's not very well written. It's apparently out of print. His 5 books are in, they're kind of maybe big pamphlets. They're kind of vanity publishing, or he has it published through his group, the Center for Political Initiative, something like that. Center for Political Innovation. His books are kind of vanity publishing, but I noticed that book is out of print. And you can't find Amazon, nobody has it. It's hard to find. I think this is deliberate. I think Caleb wanted to kind of bury it, not because it's anti-Semitic, but because it's poorly written, and it could be construed as anti-Semitic, misconstrued, like a book like that is a Zionist lobby in the US. Norman Finkelstein wrote stuff about that and it's destroyed his career. You want to write about a book like that, it has to be very well written. And you write it when you're a little bit later on in your career. Max Blumenthal can do this, wrote Goliath and other stuff about Israel. He's Jewish, so he can do this. I mean, it's easier for him to do this, to connect it. But he's somewhat more successful, well-known. Caleb, I believe it's like the first book he ever wrote. And, he kind of backed away. It's not that well written. It takes, the tone of the book overall takes might say, big on FDR, like patriotic, progressive patriotism, progressive nationalism. I mean, not nationalism, but progressive patriotism. He describes like Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, and he's a really big Zionist. He's also really exploitive, how exploitive Starbucks are. He talks about the Kroc family, who associated with started McDonald's. They're huge Zionists, a variety of, and he talks how exploitive they are. He talks about faction, the Irgun movement. He did FDR, and FDR always did these great things for working Americans, but he tries to make some connections there. He talks about the attack on the USS Liberty. And he talks about Ayn Rand, who was a big right-wing philosopher, who was a big Zionist, by the way. Her influence on Alan Greenspan, who kind of led the way for the 2008 financial crisis collapse. He admits it. He admitted they did. Now, Caleb does not say the Jews created the financial crisis. He does not say this. He nowhere says this. What he says is completely accepted by the left. Alan Greenspan, who actually was a mentor of Ayn Rand, was a Zionist. He does not play instruments of neoliberalism. And Caleb talks about, he does not say the Jews created the financial crisis. He does not say this. He critiques individual Zionists. The book is not very well written. Yes, it is absolutely, and I understand why you wanted to bury it. It's not that well written, but okay. But he does not say, people who slam the book haven't read. This guy, the reviews, Amazon and Goodreads, this guy Jay Rothmel. He used to be on Facebook, Left Book. I think he was in the USSWP. I've heard the names very familiar. He says about the book, this is 21st century Jew hatred. No, it isn't. And I'm very sensitive to anti-Semitism. I block people on Facebook for like asshole Khazar conspiracy theories. Like anti-Semitism is fucking disgusting. It's done a huge amount of damage. No, but it should, yeah, but it's, August Babel called it the socialism of fools. No, anti-Semitism is, and Caleb says this in his last chapter. He condemns anti-Semitism forcefully in his last chapter. The book overall is not that well. So it's Jay Rothmel. It's 21st century Jew hatred. No, it isn't. He emphasizes, he just opposes anti-Semitism. He associates with like Illuminati conspiracy theories and stuff. No, he doesn't. He points out some individual Zionists, the Zionist lobby, while the U.S. workers were hurting. New York City, for example, sent $100 million of aid to Israel, massive amounts of aid. And his book is absolutely correct. It takes like a patriotic, progressive patriotism, which I would kind of disagree with. He's big on FDR. He doesn't, any critique. I get where he's coming from, but it's not a very well-written book. So anyway, Caleb is not anti-Semitic or right-wing or a crypto-Nazi. The Facebook left really, really much of, not everyone, but much of the Facebook left really hates him. I think there's a lot of jealousy there. He's doing what they wish they were doing. There's somebody from Workers. He explained when he left Workers' World Party, and I think it was 2015. I don't really know. Somebody from Workers' World said Facebook, well, we expelled him. He didn't agree with our politics. Caleb's side, nobody expelled him. He left. He ran into like massive bureaucratic degeneration. With where he moved to New York, he said the leadership, they were weak on theory, they were big on empire building, control of assets. They were kind of dickheads. He ran into creasing problems with them, and finally he left. And I could fully identify with it. I was in a socialist organization which had similar problems. Later on in a recent video, which I'll provide a link to it, Caleb critiqued the Marxite tendency. Interesting, Marxite tendency does have like Workers' World, PSL, and a bunch of other splits. He said the Workers' World Party kind of collapsed around 2018. There's several huge major splits from it. I don't know the details. I know people in it, really great people. I went to a party, I think in 2018 or 2017, I don't remember, Workers' World New Year's Eve party in New York, which is kind of fun. Anyway, Margaret Kimberly from Black Agenda Report was there. She's been close to them. Workers' World does seem to be rooted in like struggles of people of color in New York. But Caleb talks about a lot of the bureaucratic degeneration. I kind of agree. I see where he's coming from because I've experienced it myself in a different organization, different tendency. Okay. So Caleb, video, he critiques the Marxite tendency, basically in a nutshell, I'll probably link to it. Their idea was Sam Marcy was to take leadership of the movement. Caleb says, no, it's nonsense. It's compromising with liberalism. He critiques even Marxites today, like one slogan, one group, a split group use like there are no anti-vaxxers in Cuba, or sort of a fascist in Ukraine, in Ukrainian fascist Nazi says there are thousands of Kyle Rittenhouses in Ukraine. Caleb says totally wrong way, trying to appeal to liberals. Oh my God, these horrible anti-vaxxers, or oh my God, these Kyle Rittenhouse fascist Nazis. He said the liberals are never gonna become communists anyway. Was it Howie Hawkins did the shit? Like he supported Julian Assange up until 2016. He Russiagated himself to an extent. He used the Russiagate trope to appeal to liberals who are never going to vote for him anyway. And this, Caleb says some of the the Marxite thing of like leadership of the movement is totally wrong-headed. Need to out of the movement and to the people. And I agree with him. I think Caleb overall gets Trotsky's politics wrong. I think Trotsky's movement has very much gone off the rails. But I think theory of permanent revolution, Trotsky's development of the theory of combined and uneven development, Trotsky's writing about fascism, how to resist, what is fascism, what to do, how to fight it, is pretty amazing stuff. He made some amazing kind of contributions. So, and I push back against Caleb's kind of one-dimensional, like official Marxism, but otherwise, I think he's doing some really good work. I largely agree. He has this group called the Center for Political Innovation. I want to check it out. I have no idea. I want to check it out. I miss being in a socialist organization. And that's it for now. Hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe. And don't hate me because I'm beautiful. Thank you. Bye.